And I am now joined by former Cowboy great Daryl Johnston. Daryl, we appreciate you joining us. And it's so hot. It's been so hot for weeks here in North Texas. I can only imagine for you, if you ever have any thoughts back to Austin and training camp this time of the year.
Yeah, my wife told me how warm it had gotten in the Dallas area. We were in Birmingham and then up in Cleveland and Canton for the USFL, and I can't remember 100-degree temperatures in June. You know, we get used to that in July and August, but I got back into town and it's one of the first things every year is, and I still say Wichita Falls. I still can't figure out how we can go 2.5 hours north and it gets hotter than it is 3.5 hours south. So someone's going to have to explain that one to me one of these days.
Well, there's a reason they call it the hotter than hell bike race each summer in Wichita Falls. All right, we're a week away from the Cowboys reporting for camp. Getting back to how hot it is, those Jimmy Johnson training camps. Even as a reporter on the sideline, I was physically drained at the end of those two-a-days. These kids today, they have no idea what you went through back in the day.
No, not at all. And even, the OTAs, the quarterback schools, whatever the moniker was, that we were able to navigate some of the rules so we could hold them. Those were very competitive, even before we went to training camp. But it was always considered the unnecessary evil that you had to go through to earn the right to have the season. And, for me, they were so physically demanding that I really didn't feel as good as I did going into camp until about week 4, week 5. And that was my big complaint was, we spend our entire offseason, getting our bodies into the best shape they possibly can be. So the day you walk into training camp is the best shape you're going to be in all season. The day you walk out of training camp is going to be the worst shape you're going to be in all season. And it was just very counterintuitive for me. So I always struggled with the old system.
All right, when you look at this Cowboys team, what do you think is the best thing they've got going for them as they go into this season?
Oh, there's a number of different things that I think that they can grow and take a step from last year. I think the big thing is the chemistry that they'll develop with Dak and, just being around, Mike McCarthy in that offense, a little bit more and getting more and more comfortable. What are they going to do defensively in year 2 with Dan Quinn? There's some really, really good things to be excited about. So I think we always have that feeling at this time of year, and now it's just a process of going through and seeing, okay, where are the areas that we really need to kind of shore up a little bit. I think the big concern has to be offensive line. When you look at this team, it's always been an organization that's always had a really, really strong offensive line. Things have been built off that group. And they're in a little bit of a transition right now with some guys that have retired recently, some guys that are a little bit older right now. So how quickly does that starting 5 come together? Because it's never a situation where you have one standout guy or 2 really good guys. It's how does that 5 function together as a group? And that's when it becomes really special, because I've seen a number of offensive lines in the NFL that don't have any Pro Bowlers on them, but the 5 of those guys work so well together that there's that, that old saying, the sum is better than the individual parts. So that'll be my big thing, is how quickly can this offensive line come together and grow and start to play at a high level.
Can you believe it's now the 30th anniversary of that 1992 team, which is talked about by many being the best Cowboys team ever, maybe one of the top 5 to 10 NFL teams ever. 30 years since 1992 now.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how quickly time has gone by. I think we all wonder, we go back and we were down in Atlanta when Nate went into the Black College Football Hall of Fame. And it was Troy Aikman, me, Dion, Nate, Mark Stepnowski, Tony Wise was there. And just kind of going back and thinking about those days, was really unique. And even getting, the ability to get Dion's perspective from, somebody who was an opponent at that time, in 92 was really interesting. So as young as we were, if free agency doesn't come around and that group is able to stay together, I think we all wonder exactly, what that group would have accomplished over the years.
And if the coach would have stayed too, how about that?
Yeah. He was rather important. That one piece or that Jimmy Johnson guy was pretty key.
You got a chance to see Jimmy earlier this month as the USFL, as you, of course, being the executive vice president of football operations of the USFL. And Jimmy played a part in your championship week in Canton, Ohio, didn't he?
He did. I wanted it to be kind of a celebration. So, our group planned, that trip to Canton not only is something for, our players to go and compete for a championship, but also, we all wanted to reward not just the players, but the coaches themselves for all the hard work that they had put in during the course of the regular season. So I was really surprised how many hadn't been to Canton. And there was a number of coaches, on the 4 staffs that were there, that was their first time there. So the opportunity to have them go up and do a walkthrough to get ready for the game, but then to be able to transition and go into the museum and do the tour and then kind of come together as a family there with all 4 teams, all 4 staffs, have lunch and then have Jimmy come in and do a presentation. And then the Q&A at the end of it, the very last question was just unbelievable. And if, you had to script everything you wanted Jimmy to hit on during the course of that presentation, he nailed every one of them. But that last question, his response to one of our players and how he answered it was absolutely perfect.
Can you reveal what that last question was?
Yeah, it was one of our guys, asking Jimmy, as a guy who, put together a championship team at the collegiate level, put together a championship team at the professional level. If you're looking at us as players in the USFL, what is it that you're looking for? And his answer was awesome, because it's not just about what you do on the field. So he said, listen, you're gonna come across my desk as an evaluator because of how you play the game, but that's just a part of it. He goes, I'm going to go into my network and I'm going to reach out to any and all the coaches I know or can get connected with that you've played for. I'm going to reach out to all the guys who you've been teammates with that I have a connection to. And I'm going to ask them who you are as a man. How hard do you work? How accountable are you? And Jimmy had already gone through that one thing that he always does is, I've got a guy here that does everything right. And I've got a guy here that doesn't quite do everything that we want him to do. And do you really think I'm going to treat those guys exactly the same? No, I'm always going to treat this guy. So he had already gone through all that. And then just for him to get into the little things. And that was one of the big things that we were trying to stress to our players all along. You're not in the NFL right now. You've had an opportunity to be there. Well, why is that? And a lot of times it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the football part, because they're good enough to get that look, but why aren't you staying there? So it's always something that's a little bit deeper. So it was perfect that Jimmy hit on, some of the character, components, your work ethic, how good of a teammate are you? How good are you at your assignments? Just all the little things that make you like a true professional day to day.
It's like the old story. If one player falls asleep in a team meeting, he gets cut the next day. If Emmett or Michael fall asleep, he'll go find a pillow for him.
Yeah, he shared that story. There's a couple of good short stories that he can share. And I had guys come up, because they're at the age where a lot of that's new to them when they hear that. And he's, oh, he was just saying that, right? That's just like a scare tactic. I'm like, no, I was actually in that meeting room when that happens.
What has been your motivation getting involved in the spring leagues, going back the Alliance of American Football and then the XFL with the Dallas Renegades here, and now at the league capacity as the senior or executive vice president of football operations for the USFL? What motivates you to do this?
The broadcasting has been awesome. It keeps you close to the game, but you lose that competitive component because there's really no true measuring sticks. At the end of a broadcast, how well did you do? It's very subjective. Some people like my style because there's an affiliation to the Cowboys. Sometimes that's a roadblock for a lot of fans. If you're doing a game against some of our NFC East rivals, sometimes they're not excited to have a former Cowboy because they don't know if you're going to be biased, in your perspective. So you got to kind of work through some of that. And a lot of times people hear what they want to hear. It's not necessarily what you say, it's what they hear. So you get into some pretty interesting conversations about that, but there's just not that satisfactory component from a player's perspective of when you win, that really great feeling of all the hard work you've put into it, that sick feeling when you lose, and okay, where do we need to get better? And you can get that evaluation. So it's really hard, as a commentator, to kind of, really have that opportunity to satisfy that quest for competition. You get a little bit of that when you're the general manager of the team. So in San Antonio and in Dallas, you're able to kind of fill some of that, because that's the team that you and your personnel staff have put together. And now you're competing against the other teams around the league. And there's going to be areas where you want to improve and elevate, the quality of play at certain positions, so that you get a little bit of that competitive nature back. I found this year at the league level, it's a little bit broader. It's what's the success of the entire league. So that's why, at the end of everything, after our championship game on July 3rd, and you just kind of reflect back on everything that had transpired over the previous 15 weeks, to see what was going on that field at that time, and to think back as to where we were on March 23rd on our first day of training camp. It was an incredible journey. And you really could all of a sudden start to think back on all the little victories that you had. And it was one of the things that I tried to stress to everybody that we were working with. Every day we're going to have little victories. Make sure we celebrate those, because it's going to be hard. We're going to go through this, and there's going to be some tough losses. There's going to be things that we struggle with. So when we do have those little victories, make sure we're celebrating those, and we're complimenting people that have done a great job and helped us have that little victory. So, along the course of that journey, we made sure we took some time out to celebrate our wins.
And we've seen some of the USFL players start signing with some NFL teams. In fact, the Cowboys signed linebacker Christian Sam out of Allen High School here this month. I think when you look at with the pandemic and with the expanded rosters, not only in football, but you see it in baseball, basketball, there are athletes that are not getting the opportunity that they really need in the National Football League, just because there's no room at the end. I think that there is a real need for a spring league like the USFL. I
agree. And I think we've proven that at every turn with all the different leagues. And again, this year with the USFL, and this was the largest draft class in the history of the NFL draft, with players that had a draftable grade on them. But the number of spots available isn't changing. You mentioned that there was some increased roster numbers, during the course of the pandemic, but those are all full right now. So the transition, or, that attrition that you have from year to year, that stayed the same. But the incoming talent was substantially larger. You heard the number of draftable guys on people's boards around the NFL was almost double than it was in years past. And that kind of stays in line with the numbers that were being thrown around. So where do those guys go? We were able to pull a bunch of them into our league. We expanded our rosters about 2 weeks after the draft, and we added a number of players to each team. We went 10 guys for each team. So that's an additional 80 guys that we brought into the league, and a lot of those were the 2022s. We had seen them. They had wanted to go through that draft process, which I completely understand. You waited your entire life for that opportunity. I know you're gonna want to stay with the NFL. But, in the future, we have to have that conversation. If that traditional path doesn't work out for you, there's another way to do this now. You can be non-traditional. As soon as that draft is over, you don't have to just wait on our call for a rookie minicamp. You can come right to us, and, we can get you in. We can get you 5-6 weeks of film, maybe change the perception of you as a player with some of these franchises around the NFL, and get you an invitation into an actual training camp. So that was one of the things that we saw this year. We had some of our young guys that came on and played really well for us down the stretch.
All right, I got to ask you about the big free agent signing of this offseason in the NFL. And of course, that would be Troy Aikman signing with ESPN. Wow.
Yeah. Shockwaves through the industry. I'm biased. He's a good friend. He's a great teammate. And he is the best at what he does. People are going to like, it's like we talked about before, it's a subjective business. There's a lot of people that really like what Tony Romo does and his ability to anticipate. Troy can do those things. Troy's just more traditional in his style. And he and Joe work together more traditional in a broadcast booth. Tony and Jim Nantz are a little bit revolutionary in how they're doing things. And I give Jim Nantz a ton of credit for the way he's adjusted as a guy who's been traditional for all these years and has embraced Tony's style. And there's people that like that. And, I tell people all the time, Troy can do the same thing. It's not hard when Rob Gronkowski is a 1-by-3 formation and the 3 wide receivers go to the field and you put a small corner on Rob Gronkowski who's spread out. There's a lot of us that know that football is probably going that way. So, that anticipatory thing is something that Tony's brought. It's something that's unique. Troy can do that same thing, but I see him as being more of a traditionalist, kind of out of that mold of John Madden. I just think he's outstanding at his knowledge of the game. And that's why, the quarterbacks are usually the guys that are commanding that number one spot because they see everything. We're all positionally kind of pigeonholed into our areas that we work in on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, a game-to-game basis. The quarterback has to see everything, where I'm really, focused, from tight end to tight end, vertically down the middle of the field. That's where the attention for me always went to in my film prep. That's when the first year that Troy and I worked together, that's how we kind of defined our areas was, all right, I'll get everything inside, you get everything outside, and then you teach me about the outside, I'll teach you about the inside. So it was fun to learn from him, but I think it's well-deserved. It's going to be strange not having him at seminar this year when we go out at the end of July for Fox and to be at a Fox seminar and not have Joe Buck and Troy Aikman there. It's going to be very, very strange. So
he's probably as surprised as anyone that here 20 years after his playing career, he can make more money in the broadcast booth than he did during his NFL career.
Yeah. It's just one of those strange things right now that's happening in this industry. And again, it's really Tony Romo that kind of set that trend. He was the first one that kind of came out and commanded that type of salary because of the ratings bump that they experienced at CBS during the course of his games. So, once you do that, now you've raised that bar. But like I said, I mean, I'm going to be biased, but when you've got the guy that I consider to be the best in the league, if that's where that bar has now been set at, it's just a matter of time before somebody's going to come and get Troy Aikman and try and steal him from him.
Okay, I want to ask you about your former broadcast partner, Tony Siragusa. I know you're deeply saddened by the death of Tony last month. When I think about his broadcasting career, forget the football career, he became an iconic figure on the sideline during games that you called with him for over a decade.
Yeah, it kind of revolutionized the position. That was the sideline reporter was always the person that would bring you up to speed on issues that had happened during the course of the game, an injury report. They've gotten more involved now where they're getting some insight and adding a little bit more than just, some of the injury data or status of the players. But Tony really took it to the point where, he wanted to be, the sideline analyst. And there was actually some things, emotional, transitions during the course of the game are tangible and you can really feel them. And we're away from that in the booth. And so that was one of the big conversations that Tony and I always had. You'd see a flip in the game and I'm like, the momentum just completely left that side, didn't he? He goes, oh my God, you can feel it. You can just look at that side and you can see, kind of the uncertainty there and you can see the confidence growing on the other side. So it was great for me to be able to have somebody that, had played the game and was familiar with those transitions and emotion and how momentum swings back and forth. And you've got to grab it while you can during the course of the game and to be able to have those conversations with him. But the biggest thing about Tony, and, we saw this with everybody who was at his services, everything that he did, he made an impact in that industry. When you saw on social media, the people that reached out to him from, Snoop Dogg to, all the people in the NFL, all the people in the movie industry, all the people in the music industry, it was amazing how many people he touched. And when he was a part of what you were doing, it was a unique thing. And I always tell people, listen, there's Tony Siragusa and then there's Goose. It's kind of like there's Deion Sanders and there's Primetime. Primetime is who you see on TV. Deion Sanders is an awesome man. Tony Siragusa is that same thing. There's Goose, the big, bombastic guy on the sideline. And then there's Tony Siragusa, who is one of the greatest husbands, greatest fathers you're ever going to have an opportunity to learn from. So that was a very sad week. And, as would be with Tony Siragusa, we went up for the services. The line had to be, a quarter mile long outside the church for 7 hours for people to get in and say goodbye. It went out the door, down to the corner, and then all the way down to the next corner. And that we got there at 3:00, and it had been started at 1. And when we left at 6:00, it was finally down to the first corner. But that's how many people came through to pay their respects. That's the impact that he had on people's lives. Just an amazing guy. You know, the great thing about him was, you know, week to week with us, you know, you get into a rut, you get into a routine when you're doing these games, because it's like Groundhog Day. And if you're not careful, you really, it can impact your, you know, how you're doing your broadcast, because you're just into that routine and that rut. He was the biggest disruptor of any type of routine that I have ever been around. I mean, he was like a camp counselor on Saturdays. You know, if we were in New Orleans, you know, we're going to go out and get on a swamp boat and go see alligators. You know, we're going to, you know, if in Florida, you know, we're going to go out and we're going to go fishing. You know, if we were somewhere that had something unique, he had always coordinated something for us to do to take advantage of what that city provided for us. So, you know, he said, listen, we're not going to sit around in this hotel room all day Saturday and keep studying. You could do the game right now if you had to. So let's clear our heads. Let's go out. Let's get away from football for a little bit and enjoy each other's company. So just a very, very unique guy to work with.
A guy you want in your locker room, right?
Oh my God, without a doubt. Yeah. He's, you know, he'll drive you crazy, but you want him on your sideline. You want him as your teammate. Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt.
Okay, the USFL is a great developmental league for players, and it's going to stay around for hopefully many years. I know you're coming back and you're doing a year or two, but the USFL is also a great developmental ground for coaches who want to become broadcasters. Case in point, Jason Garrett, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. NBC's got an opening because Drew Brees is not going to come back. And, you know, it was something that Jason tinkered around with when his playing career ended before he got into coaching. So, you know, it was good to see him there. The booth was right next to where we watched the games from. And so I would always just kind of sneak a peek and I'd go say hello and to see the passion, the smile on his face. So, you know, I didn't really get an opportunity to listen to broadcasts, but I did hear a lot of people talk about how impressed they were of his knowledge of the game, which you knew was going to be off the charts. But the big thing for me is how much he enjoyed, you know, the time during the broadcast. And you could see that when I looked into the booth. So that's the most important thing. You have to love what you do in broadcasting. You've got to love the game of football. And when that happens, it comes out in your broadcast. So it was really good to see him with a big smile on his face and having a great time doing the broadcasts.
All right. Finally, is this the first time since 2004 that an NFC East team will repeat as champion of that division? Of course, the Cowboys being the defending champs.
That is the most startling stat that I've heard kicked around. There's a few of them out there that kind of grab your attention, but I would have never guessed that it's been that long since we've had a repeat champion. And it just shows you the ebb and flow of parity in the NFL today. So when you look around the league and especially the NFC East, and you look at those teams, you know, Washington, you know, was it just a magical thing 2 years ago? And then they took a step back to reality last year. I would expect them to be a little bit better. I thought their defense was a little bit disappointing. You know, they'll have their growing pains, you know, on the offensive side as they try to resolve that quarterback spot. But, you know, I think the big thing was that defense didn't hold things together for them last season. The Giants are going to be in transition. You know, I don't see them, you know, being a threat, you know, to keep that streak alive. It brings me to Philly. You know, Philly had a pretty good offseason. They were better last year than I thought they were going to be. Maybe not from a record standpoint, but for me, just the way they played. I thought they were coming together, you know, a little bit quicker. They had a very productive offseason. That would be the one team that if something was to go wrong in Dallas and they weren't able to defend, you know, to me, it would have to come from Philly. Now, last year, Dallas handled Philly relatively easily both times they played. So there's a large gap for Philly to overcome when they match up against Dallas. But yeah, this should be Dallas's division to lose going into the season. But we've said that in the past. And unfortunately, there's been one of those teams that's popped up and they've snuck in and stolen that division title from Dallas. So yeah, I think it's amazing to me You know, it used to be runs. You know, back in the day, you know, we'd get on a run and rule the NFC East for a while, and then Philly get on a run and rule the NFC East for a while. The Giants had ruled it, the Redskins had ruled it, the Commanders had ruled it. You know, that was just the way the NFC East worked back in the day. So to see it go back and forth as much as it has over the past, you know, 15 to 18 years is pretty